Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a profound ancient text that tackles an eternal struggle, the tension between wealth, duty, and peace of mind. We're looking at a specific striking passage from the Mahabharata, which is one of ancient India's absolute greatest epics. It's a fascinating dialogue that digs right into the heart of what it actually means to live a responsible life without letting the anxieties of the world completely destroy your inner peace.
So, let's set the stage for this incredible philosophical showdown. It starts with a heartbroken king, Yudhishthira, who has just lost his entire kingdom and is quite literally weeping on the ground. He and his brothers, the Pandavas, have been forced into exile. They're leaving behind massive wealth and power to live in a dangerous, unforgiving forest. And he is just absolutely devastated by this new reality, lamenting that they're now going to be scraping by on fruits and roots. Which brings us to the ultimate question at the heart of our explainer today. How do you do your duty when you've lost everything? This is a massive dilemma that pits a leader's obligation to his people against a sage's call for complete renunciation. Think about it. When everything is stripped away from you, how do you navigate your responsibilities? Do you fight tooth and nail to get your resources back so you can help others? Or do you just completely detach yourself from the material world?
To understand how this ancient debate resolves, we'll follow a clear arc today. First, the exiled king's dilemma. Then, affection, the root of misery. Third, the heavy burden of wealth. Fourth, Yudhishthira's defense of duty. And finally, action without attachment.
All right, part 1, the exiled king's dilemma, a crisis of duty in the deep woods.
We really have to deeply sympathize with Yudhishthira here. What's crucial to understand is that he isn't crying because he misses his golden throne or his fancy clothes or personal luxuries. He actually isn't greedy for power at all. He is absolutely devastated because his newly found poverty prevents him from fulfilling his core duty. And that duty is to feed and protect the loyal brahmanas. These are the scholars and priests who absolutely insist on following him into this dangerous forest. Basically, he feels like a complete failure of a leader because he just can't provide for his dependents.
Moving on to part 2, affection, the root of misery. Enter Sanaka and the Sankhya system of yoga.
Seeing the king in ruins, a learned sage named Sunaka steps in to offer a perspective that, honestly, sounds remarkably like ancient Stoicism or even modern mindfulness. He starts by breaking down the human condition, identifying 4 root causes of bodily suffering that afflict us all. Those are disease, contact with pain, exhausting toil, and finally, want, the sheer lack of the objects we desire. Sunaka points out that these are just the fundamental realities of existing in a physical body. But notice the stark contrast he draws here. On one hand, the ignorant are constantly overwhelmed by thousands of causes of grief and daily fears. They're tossed around by every single change in circumstance. But on the other hand, the wise remain entirely unaffected by a sudden loss of wealth or a sudden affliction. The wise use true knowledge to build a fortress in their minds, keeping them steady even when they're suddenly, forced into absolute poverty.
To make this abstract philosophy concrete, Sanaka uses a phenomenal metaphor to show exactly how our mental anguish physically poisons our bodies. Think about this image, a glowing hot iron bar thrust into a jar of water. The water violently boils and turns to steam, right? Sanaka is telling Yudhishthira, hey, your mental grief over losing your kingdom is that hot iron bar, and it is actively destroying your physical body from the inside out.
Now, notice how powerfully affection and attachment are portrayed here, not as virtues, but as a destructive fire. We usually think of affection as a good thing, right? But Sanaka argues that affection, attachment to people, to status, to outcomes, is the actual root of all misery. It creates this terrible, unquenchable thirst for worldly possessions. Even a tiny spark of this attachment, like a fire in the hollow of a tree, will eventually consume your entire foundation.
This brings us to part 3, the heavy burden of wealth, the fatal disease of thirsting for possessions.
Building on this idea of dangerous attachments, Sanaka takes aim at the one thing Yudhishthira thinks he needs most to solve his problems: wealth. Rather than seeing riches as a tool for good, Sanaka argues that the acquisition, retention, and expenditure of wealth brings infinite miseries and constant anxiety. If you're rich, you are never truly at peace. You're terrified the king will tax you, thieves will rob you, fire or floods will destroy your property, or, maybe worst of all, that your own relatives will turn against you for a piece of the pie. It's a fatal disease of thirst that can never actually be quenched. He uses this incredible analogy that just drives the point home perfectly. It's so vivid. Having wealth doesn't make you powerful, it simply makes you a target in every possible environment. If you're a piece of meat in the sky, well, the birds want you. On the ground, the wolves want you. In the water, the fish want you. Saunaka's point is that Yudhishthira shouldn't be weeping over losing his wealth. He should literally be celebrating it. He's just been freed from being a giant target.
But what if the wealth isn't for you? This brings us to a crucial pivot in the debate, because King Yudhishthira pushes back with an incredibly valid counterargument. Saunaka has just given this masterful speech on renouncing the world, but Yudhishthira isn't quite buying it. He essentially asks, what if I don't want the wealth for my own luxury? What if I want it for others?
So, Part 4. Yudhishthira's Defense of Duty. The Morality of a Domestic Life.
Yudhishthira represents the exact tension we all feel when balancing personal peace with our responsibilities to our community. It's the classic conflict between the monk and the manager, right? He stands his ground and tells the sage that leading a domestic life, a householder's life, is absolutely pointless if you cannot cherish and support those who depend on you. He completely transforms wealth from a selfish, dangerous desire into a strict moral necessity. He argues he needs resources not for his own ego, but to be an engine of generosity for his community.
To prove his point, he outlines these highly specific eternal moral duties of charity and hospitality. If someone is weary, you give them a bed. If they're fatigued, a seat. If they're thirsty, water. If they're hungry, food. And you do it all with pleasant looks and sweet words. Yudhishthira argues that feeding a guest is equivalent to performing a sacred sacrifice. And, let's be real, you simply cannot perform these essential duties of hospitality without some level of material wealth.
Which leads us to our final section, Part 5, Action Without Attachment, the Dialectic Synthesis.
We now have two completely valid opposing viewpoints on the table. Saunaka says attachment to wealth brings misery. Yudhishthira says wealth is required to perform your duty to others. How do we resolve this? Well, Saunaka provides the ultimate synthesis. He listens to the king, and first he acknowledges the danger of desire. He points out that we're often led astray by our seducing senses, kind of like a charioteer who has lost control of his wild horses. Even when we think we're doing good, if our senses are driving us, we're creating a resolve that plunges us into ignorance. We mistake the temporary satisfaction of our ego for true happiness. He uses this punchy metaphor that perfectly captures the tragedy of human temptation. Like an insect falling into a flame from a love of light. We think we're chasing the light, we think we're doing the right thing, maybe even seeking wealth to help others, but if we're driven by pure sensual desire or ego, we are actually blinding ourselves and burning up in the fire of temptation. So, the crucial takeaway is this highly specific concept of ahamimana. This translates roughly to ego, attachment, or selfish motive. Saunaka's brilliant solution isn't to tell Yudhishthira to stop acting or to stop helping people or to just ignore his dependence. No, not at all. The instruction is to perform your duties while completely renouncing ahamimana. You must act in the world, yes, but you must be entirely free of ego and attachment to the results of your actions.
To give us a concrete path forward, the text lays out these 8 actionable duties. You can give gifts, you can practice truth and forgiveness, you can study, you can perform your societal roles. This proves that you can absolutely still be an active, generous participant in the world as long as your actions are motive-free. You do the good deeds simply because it's the right thing to do, not because you're attached to being praised, or attached to succeeding, or attached to the wealth it requires.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really think about how this ancient framework applies to your own modern hustle. We're all dealing with our own versions of lost kingdoms, financial anxieties, and heavy responsibilities to our families and communities, right? So ask yourself, are you acting out of a desperate attachment to the result, or are you acting purely out of duty? Perhaps, just like King Yudhishthira learned in the deep woods, letting go of the outcome might actually be the ultimate key to fulfilling your true purpose.